Snow falls silently over the mountains, each flake carrying the whisper of an untold story. The wind howls across an island that seems forgotten by the world, where a lone figure wanders small, fragile, yet destined to change the fate of an entire crew. In the white wilderness, danger hides beneath the beauty, and hearts freeze not just from the cold, but from the weight of loss. But somewhere in that storm, a friend is waiting, a doctor, a dreamer, a reindeer who dares to believe. He can heal the world, and soon the Straw Hats will find him. It begins with the sea turning colder, the waves losing their playful sparkle as gray clouds roll in. The Going Merry drifts forward, her crew bundled in worn coats, their breath turning to mist. They are not just sailing toward a new island, they are sailing into a place wrapped in legends and warnings. Somewhere beyond the fog lies Drum Island, a land where the ground is buried under snow all year round, and the people whisper of strange creatures that roam its forests. But this is not a welcoming shore. Stories tell of a king who once ruled with iron greed, of a kingdom abandoned in its hour of need. The people left behind learned to survive in silence, their laughter buried under the snow. And yet, there are those who still hold on to hope that comes in the form of a young doctor who doesn't quite belong anywhere. High in the mountains, far from the warmth of human towns, a reindeer walks on two legs. His fur is thick against the cold, but the weight in his chest is heavier than the snow under his hooves. Once, he was just another creature in the wild, shunned by his herd for being different. But everything changed the day he ate the strange fruit that gave him the shape of a human. It was a gift and a curse. He could speak, think, and dream like a man. But to humans, he was still a monster, alone, wandering between two worlds. He might have stayed lost forever, if not for a man named Doctor Hiriluk. This man, with a laugh as bright as the sunrise, took him in, gave him a name, Tony Chopper. To Hiriluk, he wasn't a monster. He was a son. And for the first time, Chopper learned what it felt like to be wanted. But joy on Drum Island never lasted long. Hiriluk's body was failing, his life fading faster than the winter snow could melt. Still, he smiled, teaching Chopper that a doctor's job was not to simply cure sickness, but to give people hope. Even if that hope came only for a single day. Those words took root in Chopper's heart, and even after fate stole Hiriluk away, that seed of hope grew. He would become a doctor not just for one man, but for anyone in need. Now, as the Straw Hats make their way through the icy waters, they do not yet know that this small reindeer doctor watches from the shadows, his heart caught between fear and longing. He wants to reach out, but memories of rejection keep his hooves still. After all, every time he trusted humans, they reminded him of his place, neither fully man nor fully beast. But in the deep snow, destiny is stirring. Soon, paths will cross, and choices will have to be made. The wind carries a promise through the mountains. The day is coming when Chopper will find his crew. And his family, the Straw Hats had faced many dangers before pirates, marines, sea monsters, but nothing prepared them for the strange silence that greeted them as they stepped onto Drum Island. No bustling harbor. No traders calling out prices. Only the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the sharp bite of the wind on their cheeks. Nami's fever had worsened during the journey, her face pale, her body trembling. Every step was heavier for the crew, not just from the weight of the snow, but from the urgency pressing down on them. They needed a doctor, and they needed one fast. The villagers they found were wary. Faces half hidden behind scarves, eyes darting nervously toward the white hills beyond their homes. When Luffy asked about a doctor, their voices dropped, almost to a whisper. "There's someone," they said, "but you won't find him in the village. He lives in the mountains, alone." The hesitation in their tone wasn't just fear, it was something else. A mix of awe and uncertainty, as though speaking of a legend they weren't sure was real. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji decided to search, leaving the rest behind to care for Nami. The climb was brutal. Snow blinded their eyes, the cold numbed their fingers, and more than once, the path seemed to vanish into nothingness. The forest was still, too still, until a rustle broke through the quiet. Something moved between the trees. A shadow, small but quick. They caught only the briefest sight of it. The curve of antlers, the flash of brown fur, the glint of eyes that didn't belong to any wild animal they had seen before. Sangi muttered, half to himself, "What was that?" But Luffy was already grinning, the kind of grin that meant trouble or adventure. They followed the tracks through the snow, deeper into the forest, past frozen streams and jagged rocks. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the mountain itself was testing their resolve. And then, just as the trail seemed to fade, they saw it. A figure stood in the clearing, framed by the falling snow. His back was turned, but the sight was unmistakable, short, stocky, with a round blue nose and a puff of fur around his neck. He wore a tattered pink hat, far too big for his head, its brim dusted with frost. In his hands he carried a small wooden box filled with herbs and bandages. It was such a gentle sight in such a harsh place that, for a moment, no one moved, but Chopper heard them. His ears twitched, and in an instant he spun around. Those wide eyes, part fear, part challenge, met theirs, and the moment seemed to stretch forever. Then, without a word, he bolted into the trees. His hooves kicking up snow behind him, Luffy called out, his voice echoing through the forest, but Chopper didn't stop. Every step away was a war between instinct and longing. He wanted to help, he always wanted to help, but years of rejection had taught him the price of trusting strangers. Still, something about the boy in the straw hat gnawed at the edges of his fear. That grin, that unshakable energy. It was different. High above, from the branches of an old pine, Chopper watched them search. He saw them struggle against the cold, saw the way Luffy carried Nami in his arms when they finally returned to the village, refusing to let her touch the snow. He told himself it didn't matter, that humans weren't his problem. But the truth was, his heart was already leaning toward them, pulled by a force he didn't yet understand. In the distance, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, Luffy's laughter, and for the first time in years, Chopper didn't feel quite so alone. The night on Drum Island was a thing of quiet cruelty. The cold did not just press against the skin, it seeped in, slow and heavy, until it wrapped around the bones like chains. In the small village at the mountain's base, the straw hats gathered around a weak fire, its flickering light barely touching the shadows. Nami lay inside one of the wooden huts, her breathing shallow, her skin burning despite the frozen air. The crew had managed to find some shelter, but no doctor had come forward. The villagers only shook their heads, muttering that the one they needed would never come for strangers, but someone was watching. From a ridge above the village, hidden behind a drift of snow, Chopper's eyes followed their every movement. His small hands gripped the rim of his pink hat as if holding it would keep his thoughts from scattering. He could see the way the boy with the straw hat paced outside the hut, never still, his worry bleeding into the night. He could see the green-haired swordsman sharpening his blade not for battle, but to keep his mind from dwelling on helplessness. He could see the cook moving back and forth trying to heat water, his breath quick in the frigid air. Chopper's chest tightened. He knew what was wrong with the girl. He knew how to treat it. In his little wooden chest, herbs lay ready gathered that morning, still fragrant even in the cold. He could heal her. He could give them hope. But his hooves felt nailed to the snow. Memories rose, unbidden, like ghosts from the ice. The first time he'd stepped into a human village, desperate and trembling, hoping for help. The way they had screamed, thrown stones, called him a monster. The way his herd had turned away from him long before that, their eyes hard, their backs retreating into the trees. And then Hiriluk, bright, reckless Hiriluk, who had taken him in and given him a name. A man who laughed at danger, who spoke of healing as if it were magic, who told him that even if you couldn't save someone, giving them a reason to smile was worth the effort. And then, the day that laughter stopped, the wind cut through him now, but it was not the cold that made him shiver. It was the weight of choice pressing against his ribs. If he went to them, they might reject him. They might call him a monster. They might drive him away. But if he stayed hidden, the girl might die. In the hut, Nami coughed a deep, painful sound, and Luffy's head jerked toward her. His voice cracked as he called for water. It was a sound Chopper had heard before, years ago, when Hiriluk had been fading. A sound of helplessness. Something in him broke. He moved before he could talk himself out of it, bounding down the slope in silence, the snow parting under his hooves. He stayed in the shadows until he was at the hut side, listening to the voices within. Luffy's words were sharp with urgency, Sangi's softer, almost pleading. Chopper took a breath, another. His hand reached for the door, but before he could touch it, the green-haired swordsman stepped outside. Zoro's eyes locked on him immediately, narrowing. Chopper froze. For a moment neither moved, the snow swirling between them. Then Zoro's gaze shifted not to the antlers, not to the strange shape of the creature before him, but to the small wooden box clutched in his hands. "You a doctor?" Zoro's voice was low, calm. Chopper didn't answer. He didn't have to. Zoro stepped aside, just enough to make a path, and for the first time in years, Chopper stepped into a human home not as a monster, but as a doctor. The air inside the hut was thick with heat and worry. A pot of water hissed over the fire, steam curling into the shadows, but it did nothing to chase away the tension. Nami lay on a cot in the corner, her breath shallow, her cheeks flushed with fever. Luffy was kneeling beside her, his hands balled into fists, as if sheer willpower could keep her here with them. Sangi hovered nearby, his usual smirk replaced by a tight line. Even the villagers standing at a cautious distance seemed to sense that something fragile was unfolding. Then the door creaked open. Snow drifted in with the small figure standing at the threshold, and for a heartbeat no one spoke. Chopper stepped inside, his blue nose catching the light, his eyes darting between every face in the room. He could feel the weight of their stares, the sharp edge of their curiosity. In the past, that look had always been followed by fear, or worse, but this time, the boy in the straw hat smiled. Not a mocking smile, not a cautious one. It was open, bright, and warm enough to cut through the cold that clung to Chopper's fur. "You're the doctor," Luffy said, not as a question, but as if it were already a truth. Chopper swallowed and stepped forward. He set his small wooden box on the floor, flipping it open to reveal neatly wrapped herbs, tiny glass bottles, and worn but clean tools. His movements were quick, practiced. There was no hesitation. Once his work began, he touched Nami's forehead, frowning at the heat. He checked her pulse, listened to her breathing. Then, without looking up, he began to mix a handful of herbs in a small bowl, crushing them with the end of a wooden spoon. "She's got a dangerous infection," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "The cold is making it worse. But she be fine if we act now." No one questioned him. No one asked what he was or why he could talk. They just moved. Sangi brought more water. Luffy held the bowl steady while Chopper stirred in a measured amount of powder. Zoro stood by the door, watching with the silent patience of a guard on duty. Chopper worked quickly, brewing a strong-smelling tea that filled the hut with an earthy bitterness. He propped Nami up gently, speaking to her even though she was barely awake, and coaxed her to drink. Then he wrapped her in layers of blankets, murmuring instructions to the crew. Keep her warm, keep her still, wait for the fever to break. When it was done, he stepped back, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. He half expected someone to tell him to leave now, to slip back into the snow and disappear. But instead, Luffy stood, his grin wider than ever. "Thanks, Doctor," he said. Simple as that, the words landed heavier than Chopper expected. In them was no fear, no suspicion, only trust. It was something he hadn't heard in years, and for a moment he didn't know what to do with it. He looked away, rubbing the back of his head, his cheeks heating under his fur. "I'm just, doing my job," he muttered. But inside, the walls he'd built for so long began to crack. The night wore on, and Chopper stayed. He checked on Nami every hour, adjusted her blankets, refreshed the herbs by the fire. Each time he looked up, one of the straw hats would be there, Sangi offering food, Zoro nodding in quiet approval, Luffy chatting about the Grand Line as if they'd been friends for years. By dawn, the fever had begun to fade, Nami's breathing eased, and a hint of color returned to her face. The relief in the room was almost tangible, melting away the heaviness of the night, as the first light of morning spilled through the window. Luffy clapped a hand on Chopper's shoulder. "You're coming with us?" he said, as if the decision had already been made. Chopper blinked, startled. "What? You're our doctor now?" Luffy replied, grinning. For a long moment, Chopper didn't answer. Outside, the snow was still, falling, the mountains still cold and distant. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he belonged to the winter. He felt warm. And though part of him still whispered to run, another part, the louder part, wanted to stay in that quiet. Chopper's journey as a straw hat truly began, and the reindeer who had once been alone in the snow took his first step toward finding a family.